police as a symbol of hierarchy and authority. Hong Kong, same way. I mean, it's not capitalism in Hong Kong. They're attacking the communism and socialist police of the mainland. They want to have more. So my point is, the pieces and connections change as we have different, bigger political and economic systems like communism, capitalism are there. At least they have roots which are there, but they tend to get mixed and matched up, as in Scandinavia, or as in China and North Korea. India had a strong socialist political system, and it's now much more complex, etc. Then to add one more level and to say that these things are not just the same in one city, but we can have rich, poor, black, white, Polish, Irish, German. Then we can have as well gay, lesbian, or if we look at the political parties of Poland after the decline of communism, there were about 200, and they had all of these things and more. They had a safe sex party. They had a beer drinkers party. They had others, all kinds of environmental. So the British have about 9 different versions of environmentalism, from don't save the foxes and stop, abolish hunting, to anti-nuclear, to recycling. And these are different versions of environmentalism which map onto different political systems. So Margaret Thatcher, when she found out about this, found out that lower status, less educated women were really anti-nuclear. So she embraced an anti-nuclear position as part of her Conservative Party and brought in some of those votes in ways that illustrate the more complex, non-traditional combinations of themes. Another way that this comes together is if we take the Weberian concept of charisma, or say within legitimacy, the 3 types of charismatic, bureaucratic, and traditional. We can then, as we've done in the Scenescapes book, measure these with zip code data, 45,000 little chunks across the US, similar things in France, Spain, South Korea, and so forth. And then say what goes with charisma in different neighborhoods, in different cities. And we find, for example, that charisma in New York and Los Angeles tends to be related to higher education, to our measures of glamour, of women's high-end shopping, shoe stores, perfume, wine, etc. And think of the LA, sort of the extreme version of passing out the gold for films that win their prizes once a year, the elegant clothes that people dress up in when they're on television and presenting and receiving these kinds of awards. This is sort of the quintessential exhibitionistic, theatrical aspects of glamour in Los Angeles. And we have aspects of this in New York combined with aspects of, say, the Wall Street. But Donald Trump, with his longer hair, in that sense, was a New Yorker. But he talked about the deal. He was an individualistic New Yorker in contrast to the New Englanders that Elazar talked about. So Chicago, and so think now of our Chicago school contrast in the chapter, is it 3, I guess, of the Scenescapes book. We correlate charisma with the other 15, the other 14 dimensions, or all 15 dimensions. And Chicago is the opposite. I won't say the opposite, but not at all like LA or New York. It scores negatively on glamour and positively on neighborliness. Charisma goes together in Chicago with neighborliness, localism, egalitarianism. These, think of the small traditional Catholic neighborhood, which has its festivals, a Pilsen, a perhaps a Bronzeville, but let's say places which are not, which are explicitly defined in their own labels as neighborhoods, not the central city, not the immediate downtown. They have neighborhood festivals. So some people go down to Navy Pier and watch the fireworks. But in the last 20 years, if you look at Chicago on the 4th of July from a high-rise window, you can see hundreds, at least dozens, if not hundreds of little fireworks going on in neighborhood parks around the entire city. Chicago has more city permits issued for neighborhood festivals, 2 to 3 times as many as New York. LA has almost none by comparison. So the celebration of the local, the neighborly, the egalitarian, traditionally these were around the parishes, the Catholic churches, and they stand as monuments. But as we've heard with one of our participants here and her father, it is a tragedy from his standpoint that these parishes have closed. More than half of these have closed in the last 5 or 10 years. So the Catholic churches are going down. There she is, Mary Hansen. The parishes. Weber, theorizing this kind of thing, did his book called Ancient Judaism, and stressed that the rise of that in time of crisis, when think of crisis in Chicago this summer, the looting, the Black Lives Matter challenges, the protests, when the leadership was challenged in the ancient Judaism, in the Bible and in the Torah, by Syria, by Persia, by Egypt, by these big, much more powerful countries, when the whole state of Israel or these groups were risked being completely destroyed. Classically, Weber points out, you had the emergence of prophets, the ancient Jewish prophets. And there were dozens and dozens of them. Many of them are included in the Torah and in the Bible. But the most important one that Weber then elaborates as the archetype illustrating the concept of charisma was, of course, Jesus Christ. But the point is, he was a Jew and he was a prophet who emerged in a way along with a bunch of others. He was not that unique. He could be compared, and that's what Weber does. And so what I'm doing now is taking this even further than Weber did, of saying we can have rap singing as the basis of Bronzeville Black Festival music downtown and on the stages of Chicago Fest. But as the rappers can become particularly compelling, successful economically and popular, maybe they can use their music to go back to their own cultural roots, which is, of course, gospel, hymns, Christian classic music. So you have some of the leading London and US rappers making Christian rap. Then they talk about it on national public radio and tell you how they interpret this return to the importance of having localism, neighborliness, an integrated society where we don't kill each other and where we're coming back. And so you have rap popular singers who are using their funds to build up. Okay, how does this then come down to the local area? Let's go to an example, if Andy can show it to us, of how we can connect what I'm saying with lower status African American men who were seen as the most sort of extreme exceptions to the American Horatio Alger success, even though I'm pointing to when there's some of them who have been Michael Jordan. Yeah, let me add one more thing I may have mentioned. The 5 people who earned the most money, no, the 10 people who earned the most money a few years ago included how many African Americans? Oprah Winfrey, Michael Jordan, Michael Jackson, and Magic Johnson. 4 out of 10 were African American, all in entertainment, all in symbolic sports, Hollywood, television, and the like. New industries. They weren't the head of AT&T. They didn't go to Harvard Business School. They came up from the projects in the case of Oprah Winfrey, and we're proud of it. So makeovers, how to make yourself better is an enduring theme. All right, let's go to the videos, please. If Andy, you can show us. And what we have is a combination. That is, we have both videos. Actually, let's look at the text first. The picture. We need the pictures, and then we need a little. I'll give you some quick paraphrase, and then we'll get to the video with some interpretation.
I'm sorry, I don't think I have the text.
The text, I mean, you should have a Word document. And in that Word document, which I sent to both of you about an hour or two ago, you see
I
that?
only have a picture of some printed notes.
You don't have the Word document. I just checked my email.
But there's a picture with the printed notes are text that I want to try to have in the background, and then the picture I want to put on the screen if we can now. The picture has the guys. That is, if we think now of aesthetics and color, we've got a black truck, 3 guys with black clothes on, with specific distinctive black haircuts. You see that? Everybody can imagine that, even if you don't. And I'll go ahead if it's not working. But yeah, did you ever see any of this, or no? Here we go. No, maybe what I did was send you the wrong one. Ha ha! There we go. That's the problem. Okay. Yeah, that's it. My mistake. I sent you the wrong file. Let me see if I can easily redo this while we're talking. So let's try a new message. I'm gonna go to Peter's. What you have there just to make the connection included the last video we saw, and it fits in with this same story, symbolism, and we have the tearing down of the freeways with the rise of the contemporary city, and I talked about the Norquist, mayor of Milwaukee, who came to class and showed his pictures of the Renaissance Italian city. What's wrong? Urban innovation. Okay, here we go. UI2. Okay, I'm sending that now. Okay, so the same theme is in Milwaukee with tearing down, or let's say, tearing down the exit ramps to the freeways. That got the mayor of Seoul elected president of Korea. And symbolism, design, this is an acceptable term. I was talking with the chairman of architecture at IIT. Design is an intermediary category between architecture and art. So design can be clothes, it can be tables, it can be chairs, it can be manufactured in mass, or it can be uniquely created by one artist. But it's ways of joining the arts with more and more than in the past. and this is a conception which we elaborate a lot more in the culture course that I've taught with John Levy Martin, but I'll just mention while we're getting this one picture to come up. Think of dramatic ways of doing this. The success of undermining legitimacy with the lootings in American cities last summer, with the destruction of the Twin Towers using okay, here we go, using civil American airplanes, by illustrating the brilliance of these protesters, and undermining or challenging the legitimacy of global capitalism, which was incarnated in the Twin Towers that coordinated banking and investment around the world from Manhattan. Okay, check the color. 3 of them at least have black shoes as well. But the theme is there. Is this the Middle East? Is this Mexico? This is Vancouver. Okay, let's look. This is a clip from let's see. Can we scroll down to the text and go from here a little bit, because we don't. Okay, here we go. No, just a little bit above that. So Vancouver newspaper. He pleaded guilty in September was sentenced to a day plus probation. Then in November, charged with breaching his probation. He's due back in provincial court, Vancouver, January 30th, 2020. Okay, so charged for murder. The young rapper and accused hitman at the funeral of the slain Hell's Angel. Okay, the point is the gangs are killing opposing gang members. That's the theme. Okay, next paragraph from the Vancouver report in bold. Experts say the trend of gangsters using rap lyrics to condemn and threaten rivals started with Chicago drill music more than a decade ago and has spread around the globe to places like these. Forrest Stewart, okay, Stanford, he's just gone to Stanford. Spent 2 years embedded with youth in a Chicago gang, and his book based on that research came out this spring, and he was named about a couple of weeks ago a genius by the MacArthur Foundation. So he's a certified genius. Stewart said the new developments with gang-linked rappers releasing diss tracks sound pretty identical to Chicago and the south of London and San Jose. The demographics change, but so many of these online dynamics seem to be similar. Okay, even the original Chicago drill music terms, ops for opposition, pole, or pipe for gun, are being adapted. Okay, let's scroll on down. So BC is British Columbia. Okay, she said, okay, Winpenny, okay, so she's of the Anti-Gang Combined Forces Special Enforcement Unit of Vancouver. And so she's what she says is really very similar to elsewhere, is the breakdown of the big 2 gangs, which we had 40 years ago in Chicago, to hundreds of little gangs with hundreds of fireworks going on the 4th of July. But she points to Toronto maybe a little ahead of Vancouver. Okay, let's scroll on down. And then let's see if we can. Okay, let's let Forrest. Forrest and I used to ride our bikes together. We both love cycling. He rebuilt lots of bikes when he was a grad student at UCLA, and he grew up nearby LA, and he came here, and he had, when he came here, a materialist conception. Let me briefly add here. Most of the working on poverty by sociologists, political scientists, many journalists and others condemned the idea that people, lower status, especially African American men, might be labeled lazy or non-motivated, and that subjective explanation of poverty or lack of success was seen as racism. That in turn was joined with a report of Moynihan and the wide discussion and criticism, which led basically for about 20 plus years to the vetoing of any sort of discussion of culture, whether it was subjective feelings or love or the Bible or other things, and instead poverty, income, maybe education, material factors were stressed as the sources of poverty, and it was seen as wrong to do the opposite. Okay, the revolution happened when the leader of this kind of interpretation, I'm looking for his book to pull it over here. I can't pull it right off the shelf, but William Julius Wilson, who was the leading African-American sociologist, along with one colleague, here and then at Harvard. Basically, Bill Wilson changed his interpretation when Obama was elected. Bill Wilson was co-chair of the Urban Transition Committee, and he basically saw the potential for research and sociological analysis in forming a more sensitive set of national urban policies that could improve the well-being of young and older African Americans, as well as others who had specific factors and problems which were not generic. So he called for an explicit recognition of culture and research in joining with urban policies, and did a book on this, which then has led to a major transformation and looking more closely at how poverty works. And this is where reading this book, discussing it, riding around with our bikes and looking at different neighborhoods, looking at especially the postings on YouTube of the gangs, looking at the gangster rap, led Forrest to a dramatically new interpretation. So that's what we want to feature here. Let's take a look at this if we can play his video. Try to, if that works, please, Andy. Yeah, okay, there we go, great. Can we make it bigger?
The fundamental change that we've seen in terms of putting policing on the national radar has to be digital social media. We've seen this massive democratization in terms of communication technology.
A little louder?
Some recent statistics have actually come out from here, from the University of Chicago, that actually shows that Black youth are some of the most prolific users of social media, and they're also the social group, racial group that is uploading original content and modifying content online at the highest rate, sometimes two times the rate that white kids are. And so I think that when you combine that with the fact that there are certain issues that are affecting the Black community in America, when you combine those two, then I think it's kind of a no-brainer. It's kind of natural that we're going to see a kind of explosion of lived reality. While I was doing my work on Skid Row, I think one of the major things that I realized was that poor urban residents and the police essentially were suffering to a certain extent from the same exact policies that have been handed down, over the last few decades, right? So we've seen a real hollowing out of the welfare state. We've seen this amplification of policing and this call by cities to use police to solve a whole host of problems that we never used to necessarily see as policing issues. Things like mental illness, things like addiction, things like homelessness, things like general disorder, poverty in general. I think that one of the things that my research has really shown is that how things are moving now, this is the new normal. Beginning in the 1990s, we really changed our policing policies where we've now insisted that officers make contact after contact. Here in Chicago, we call these touches. If you sit around in police headquarters, you'll hear the superintendents grilling officers, telling them, make more touches, make more touches. The notion is, the more people we touch, the more bad guys we might discover. The problem is, the hit rate is pretty low. Usually, you're putting somebody up against a wall, you're putting them in handcuffs, you're not finding anything. Well, the problem is, the more you do that in a community, the more animosity you're gonna generate, the more distrust you're gonna generate, the more anger people are gonna have every single day when they walk out of their street. Put all that together, you've got a really explosive combination where police have to make stops and residents feel this incredible anger that they're being stopped all the time. And I think that this is why we're beginning to see this real incredible escalation.
Okay, that's the quick story.
I think
This is on his last book in the background. He doesn't have a decent video yet on the Ballad of the Bullet, which is the new one. But the basic story is that the gangs are making their own videos. They're editing them and they're getting expert editors in Germany, in Canada, and elsewhere who have lots of equipment that the guys in poor neighborhoods in Chicago do not. Then they post them and the editors take them out, take out stuff and make them super tough and macho. They don't show them at home helping their girlfriends change the diapers of their child together or doing the dishes, even though they spend most of their time doing stuff like that. Okay. So do we have a driller rap video we can briefly include, Andy? Just a little bit.
Yeah, one moment.
Your face down. When you see me, better keep your face down. I got a tech on my neck that shoot rounds. Hit a stain, do a jerk, don't make a sound. Go out of town, fuck a bitch and smoke a pound. I'm with the rolls and we tone on the block. And if a op rap passes, gonna be shots. That whack, that L's to the ops. Fuck the cops, like Tutu get popped. And the foreign cop all sacked up. Free bands, got my pockets racked up. Saying fuck the bees that get you whacked up. All these new niggas, they can back up.
Okay, that's enough. You get a flavor at least. But the one bottom line is that there is explicit conflict and naming of rival gangs and murders which have followed, attacking, retribution for the murder by after the head of the gang has been killed. Other lower gang members will come back, go to the funeral and shoot at people at the funeral, etc., at a funeral home, shoot at a church to symbolize that they'll go anywhere to show how much you need to be careful and how tough they are and how much they are breaking any and every law. Okay, so that sense of challenge to the establishment is what Forrest is now documenting, but that in a sense is well known. What's not known and what Forrest adds to this is the people he studied in the gang and talking to others about 90% of them never shoot anybody. Maybe 9% are drillers. They actually shoot. 90% are just rappers. They only sing. But they pose with big guns. They pose in a very tough way, and they scare a lot of people. And they can talk in ways that can generate a lot of discussion. But the point is, then the next bottom line is no longer are the gang members or poor or young guys who are not even necessarily in gangs themselves, not necessarily looking just for turf, drugs, prostitution, gambling. They're looking instead, that was the past, they're looking instead for YouTube ratings. YouTube ratings, that's the same as Lady Gaga. That's the same as other singers and other entertainers. It has become symbolized and become part of the entertainment complex, and they can post them themselves anytime they want. They don't go through RCA or MGM or a record company. And we can post these classes on YouTube, as can the gangs. So there's a bottom-up decentralization, but also a fragmentation in ways that you can say it looks more like anarchy or egalitarian anarchy than it looks like the Weberian hierarchical Prussian state that he wrote about in his Bureaucracies essays. Okay, so that's the original contribution of Forrest, really to listen to how what has been changing and to show the degree to which this individual, some individual local Chicago gangs are doing this, but then as the Vancouver news story showed, this is spreading globally. Not necessarily everywhere, but at least in some areas where you have some of these related dynamics. Okay. I'll put in one more sentence and we can elaborate if you want, but let's have a little discussion and see how that goes for a bit. One way to link this with bigger theories, some of which we've seen in this course, say in the Wildavsky reading, in the Scenescapes book, is with the ideas of not just individual values like transgression or neighborliness, but how they combine in a story, something more general. So one small way, it's just a little bit bigger than the individual dimension, is a slightly bigger dimension like Bohemia. And so that was used in Baudelaire, in Benjamin, in the Arcade Project, and seeing the shopper, the flaneur, as potentially driving the market, not the producer, not the capital owning banker, but the consumption individual shopper whose taste and preferences drive the capitalist machine in a direction of what the individual at the consumption level wants. Having that come from a Marxist theory writer, Walter Benjamin, in the middle of an essay where 2/3 of his terms are right out of Marx, class conflict, bourgeoisie, et cetera, but at the same time, the flaneur is introduced. And so we have these, the point is we can combine in new ways the components of what existed earlier. The Scenescapes we've suggested is sort of like a chemical table of elements, that if we combine these individual elements, we can get very different combinations of products, and things can explode if they go the wrong way, or they can be poisonous, but they can also be the basis of new kinds of plastics and things which make it unnecessary to use rubber from rubber trees if you can create it from abstract plastic chemicals. And there are new plastics invented, once a day these days, for instance. If we look at the leading, when we were working on the book on scenescapes, we went around and talked with some of the anthropologists and others of who's doing the leading work on this. And I myself was a student in Paris of Claude Lévi-Strauss, and I knew about his work from there, but I was trying to find out if there's anything much better. And the bottom line is not much. So Lévi-Strauss published 4 books, which are published by the USC Press in English translation. And the French title is Mythologique, the sort of, about myth. There's a long title in English, sort of the study and function of myths and in society or something like that. But it's basically myth. And one of the leading ideas is that the big structures of myth combine by joining many smaller components. And so you can have, and so Lévi-Strauss numbers these. He has hundreds of myths, such as a classic Western Greek is the Oedipus myth, that is basically the young man fights against authority. What Lévi-Strauss points out, and family structures are critical structures in Brazilian, or let's say pre-literate societies. They don't have big markets and so forth. So the family structures are very, very important. So he then shifts, Lévi-Strauss does, to matrilinear societies, and he finds they don't have Oedipus myths at all. They have instead myths where the woman is the source of authority, and she is fought by the poor, beaten down man who in the myths will do things like carry her around on his back for her entire and their entire life together. And she in turn has him walk into the river, and then the fish eat out his kidneys, and then he has to live without any kidneys. So we have this image of the matriarchal woman oppressing the man in the myths. So think then of the videos, the rap songs, Lady Gaga, Beyonce, and the images we have today that interpenetrate what we see, and then how this in turn fits in with the multi-causality. Logan and Malich, I'll just mention briefly, as I have already, their book, Urban Fortunes, presented in its first original edition a basically Marxist-inspired material interpretation of American cities, or cities in general, where the key drivers were the developers, the people who wanted to build new real estate. And they were not responsive to the public or to political leadership or whatever. They just wanted capitalist gain. And the political leaders would at least let them do that because of the assumption implicitly that everyone wanted to maximize their land value and their tax, the government wanted the tax money perhaps, but that was the simplified model. They did 20 years later, they both changed their minds. Logan and Malich both published a series of papers showing, for instance, Harvey Malich did a great paper contrasting Ventura and Santa Barbara, California, 2 neighboring cities. And in about 1880, they both were pumping oil. Ventura continued doing the same thing through the whole 20th century. Santa Barbara said, let's not do that. We're going to make dirty our beaches. It was a little bit like Paris. Remember that with Benjamin? And so let's make Santa Barbara into a beautiful city. Let's not have just a road right by the beach. Let's make the beach beautiful. So then the University of California built a campus there. Other people there, the Kestrel Bike Company is a leading carbon fiber bike company, began producing in Santa Barbara. Ronald Reagan moved there when he retired from the White House, etc. So it's a beautiful location. And then they had an oil spill. So Harvey Mollich analyzed the dynamics and found, hey, these new social movements, they were really important about the environment. And they were attacking what was the foundation of the economy of Ventura, the next town to the south. And so the more orthodox Marxists attacked Harvey Mollich for saying, how can you be saying this? You're not saying that capitalism in its normal way of working is the driver. You're doing a reverse causal argument. And Harvey Mollich said, of course, consumption matters, lifestyle matters. People want to have nice beaches and nice views. And so basically, John Logan so when they then brought out a new version of the book, which is written in a way that sounds as if it could be part of The City is an Entertainment Machine, the title of which I chose because Harvey Mollich was a student of ours here at Chicago decades back, and he published a famous paper called The City is a Growth Machine. And so entertainment can now be part of growth, but the dynamics are not simple capitalism and land value. They're also working through entertainment, beauty, myth, YouTube ratings, beaches, clean beaches, and an egalitarian style where lifestyle is more prized as a driver and concern of everyone in the process. Okay, I said I would build up to some of this, but okay, let me just pause for a second, but I'm almost gonna ask Gray if he wants to comment, as he's gonna have some stuff to present more on Wednesday, but let me pause for anybody who has any questions. I've said a lot of things pretty fast. I've referenced some stuff that some of you have read very carefully and did perfectly on the exam. Everybody, as I said, did very well on the midterm. But anything you want to raise in conjunction with these pieces, as I'm trying now to begin to take some individual cases, which we're reading in this section of the course, but try to show how they fit with some bigger themes. Questions or comments? Let me look at our names today. And we got Mary and Zipporah. Anything you want to add or ask? And then Alejandro.
I do have a question, Professor. What was, this is just technical, what was the name of these last book by Logan and Mollich?
Urban Fortunes. It's on the syllabus in the last section.
No, but that was the one they did when they were, as you described, Marxists.
Yeah.
But the second one, which one was it?
No, the ironic point which I'm making, I made too fast and I didn't articulate enough. They didn't change the book at all. They wrote a new introduction when the publisher, I think it was published with a new publisher, the University of California Press. And that new introduction is written to and that's what's ironic, it's the same book. They don't say anywhere in the introduction that we've changed the book or updated it. They simply write as if entertainment, lifestyle, symbolism, beaches, new social movements, these are important aspects of cities today. They don't say see chapter 3 because it's not in the book. That's what's ironic. It's in their other books. So there are There are two key papers by John Logan I've cited elsewhere. If you want to get that, but I'd say don't worry about that level of detail. There's the book by Molich is called Getting Stuff. I didn't mention that before, but he talks about toasters and consumer products that the consumer thinks a lot about, but he talks about the importance of new theories to capture this, but he in no way challenges. He never says I'm wrong. By contrast, as I pointed out, the political scientist, the gentlemanly Southern Clarence Stone, said he doesn't quite say I am wrong. He said times have changed, and our theories that stress business and capitalism no longer are appropriate the way they were. I would say he overstates in putting it that way. I would say in some cities, some countries, some context, some issue areas, business is critically dominant. But that still leaves out, what does business want? What policies? And we then contrast with Mark Baldessari, Lake Tahoe versus, say, Ventura, California, or Santa Barbara with Ventura. So, anyone else?
I have another comment. It's not a question. It's in fact, or it may be a question. Have you seen this new piece? It's a documentary on the last election here in Chicago. It's called City So Real. It was done by National Geographic.
No, I haven't.
I think it'll be useful to do a review. It's a 5-episode series, and they discussed a few of the some of the concepts which were discussed, at least briefly today, by Forrest Stewart, for instance. And I mean, I could quote a few moments from these documentary, but I think it is worth of of self-analysis, not necessarily of me implying a few stuff. So that was just an interesting point that I was hoping to make today.
Okay, now that's great. And so, I mean, for sure, we want to use these new developments, the videos, the pamphlets, the TV coverage, the postings on websites, social media. At the same time, the core of the course, we try to make the social science theories that try to make social science out of these raw materials. And so, yes, we can link them back and forth like the driller's rap, but the driller's rap is not quite the core result of that is it's raw material, but it doesn't say where and why and how is this working. And so we go to Forrest Stewart, who studied this for most of his career now, and he's come up with a dramatically new interpretation, which fits with a number of other things, but haven't been articulated as clearly as he has done previously.
One final thing. I was hoping that it'll make sense with this book of Urban Fortunes. There's an author under the name, whose name is Joel Rast, and he writes a book titled The Rise or the Dual City, and he uses this book to describe the development of a urban renewal project for South Loop, which was commissioned under Daley II's term. I forgot the name of the development. I'm sure you're fully acquainted with. And I mean, going through some of these ideas that you mentioned under big, capitalist developments, those that seek or look for a land value increase and etc. And I find it hard to, watching or reading Rast's work, I find it hard to see how that particular development is able to produce all these elements that you describe: entertainment, lifestyle. I mean, there's a certain lifestyle, of course, which is attracted to these kinds of development, but the other elements may be missing. And now so more in more contemporary times, we have Michael Rees' site, which claims at least that they will consider these new elements of entertainment, lifestyle, and the symbolism. And I was wondering if is this not a linear uh, type of evolution, but instead a circle-like type of evolution, which these developments themselves are coming into a loop or a cycle, in where at some degree or at some point in history they are producing all these elements, and then at some other point they don't.
Okay, now that's great. Thank you for bringing that in. And the contrast between the new South, well, let's say the 30-year-old, 40-year-old South Loop development and the new Michael Rees is an excellent one. These are both right next to Bronzeville, and I happen to be pretty close to a number of the participants in each of these and the debates around them. And these are two specific South Side Chicago projects. However, you can find these same themes in Rio de Janeiro, in Paris, in Hong Kong, in LA, debated and discussed in very similar terms. And the term dual, I would say, comes right from Hegel and from Marx. That is, the idea is instead of saying life is a continuum and there are 12 variables that are all working in different combinations, you've got the good and the bad, the high and the low, the thesis and the antithesis, and that kind of simplifying, which you also get in the theological discussions of some kinds of sermons, simplifies and has in a two-party system that makes sense. If you got 5 parties, it's more complicated. But the dual term was and is widely used from the 19th century onward, in obviously most especially the Hegel, Marxist variations continuing in Manuel Castells. And I pointed out as well how he too was a Spanish Marxist and then changed away from it as the Spanish party embraced Euro communism. So Joel Rast is a Wisconsin social scientist who's studied Chicago, and he's done several papers and gone into this. And he's not totally alone. There are a couple of other people, but the interesting linkage between the two is the key architect developer, and his name is Ferdinand Kramer, Kramer. He was the chairman of the board of Draper and Kramer, and he was a USC student in the 20s. His family went bankrupt. He went to Washington during the war. He worked in national housing issues, similar to what became the Department of Housing and Urban Development. He came back and he helped to create the leading civic organization in Chicago, especially concerning housing, the Metropolitan Housing, and then it was called the Metropolitan Housing Authority, became the Metropolitan Planning and Housing Authority, or MPC. No, it's committee or commission. So it's civic leaders, business, government, banks, universities, people who work together and talk about what can we do to make Chicago a better place. And so he helped to create that, and then to talk about what can we do to improve the housing of the downtown area as the slums and the dual nature of the beautiful affluent Michigan Avenue, the Burnham Plan, the parks, the aesthetic imagery, the the big institutions created in the 1890s, the civic, the university, the opera, the symphony, and the Art Institute were all private. And they were brilliant, internationally competitive institutions in their own domain, but they were totally disconnected from the political system and from poor average folks. So what happened in the 1990s, was that they became connected more explicitly through cultural policy and Daley. And then that in turn built on Daley One. So I won't go into the full but there are multiple books on this, because Chicago is, as I said, it's the most studied city, most books on Chicago of anything in the world. And Ferd Kramer was important with Daley One in connecting him to the problems of slum housing in the South Side and this was called the Black Belt in the classic sociological maps of the area. Let me tell you, we're near the end, so let me get to a bottom line to pull this together on. I knew Ferd Kramer pretty well. What makes the story complicated is that he was not just a developer. He was a Hyde Parker. He is a USC graduate. He was Jewish. His wife was Protestant. She was the executive director of the Illinois League of Women Voters, and was active in. She was an architectural landscape architect, very close to you, Alejandro. She was the person who chose and maintained the trees, the shrubs, the bushes around the old Michael Reese and the Prairie Shores development to make it aesthetically attractive. At the same time, that they wanted, basically, Kramer helped help the mayor do more to improve the quality of the housing in the area by tearing down lots of housing and building the State Street high-rise buildings, which were detailed in several books, lots of books on that, and which at the beginning, where everybody wanted to live there, after 20, 30 years, they were considered a disaster and they were torn down. But the point is that Kramer then one more plan he had was to integrate the higher quality housing with the Loop and Hyde Park by connecting the two together. And right in the middle between the two was where I live, Prairie Shores, which is the buildings and this second project that you're talking about. So the two projects that he was involved with, both were in a sense to fill the gap between those two and improve the quality of housing. And he was also very active in the civic organizations of African Americans. My timing, we got 8 minutes left, not 1 minute. He was very active in the main civic organizations of African Americans in the 50s and 60s. And their main theme in those years was the same as Martin Luther King. The big theme was racial integration. So where I'm living here now is the largest racially integrated housing project in the United States. There are 5 buildings, 19 stories each, and they were racially integrated. And then they were maintained explicitly by Ferd Kramer as racially integrated by trying to maintain a large number of people applying so you could have a mix of blacks, whites, and others. And then there was a couple that was a black man and a white woman, and they each applied for separate apartments. They weren't living together. And he was black. She got her apartment first, and he then sued Draper and Kramer for racial discrimination because he said they should not discriminate in the amount of time you'd have to wait if you were black. HUD went along with him and said, you may not maintain separate lines. You must not pursue racial integration that way. You must give the housing to whoever comes first. Okay, Ferd Kramer himself then rounded up the president of the Urban League, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. I mean, 3 or 4 top people like that, plus Kenneth Clark, who did groundbreaking research on dolls, and do little black girls play with white dolls or black dolls, and how can you change that pattern, that kind of thing. They all went together to the Secretary of HUD and said, we are in favor of racial integration. We want to maintain these kinds of policies in Prairie Shores. Can't you loosen or make it possible for us to maintain racial integration in this most important project in the United States? And Secretary said, could you, from these leading organizations, send me a letter on your letterhead which says that? And what did they say? What did they have to say? This was after Stokely Carmichael. This was after Black Power had come to dominate within the organizations. So even though they had the same names and some of the same people, they basically moved out the people like Ferd Kramer. They didn't want their money, they didn't want their staff, they didn't want their help, they didn't want racial integration as an explicit policy. And they were closer to Black Power, not as a militant, aggressive policy, but in terms of Black businesses, Black neighborhoods, and helping the quality of housing for everyone who was Black, but not promoting racial integration if it was in conflict with better Black housing for Black folk. Okay, so that was the conflict. So the next year, Ferd Kramer went back again, twice, with the same kinds of people. Said, couldn't you please, you're going to destroy this whole project. Do you really want to do this? And same conversation, same result. So the project became about 80, 90%, depending on the building and so forth, African-American. And then with the market prices going up, it became more IIT, Asian student oriented. And that in turn is leading to market competing with political, competing with social movement dynamics. And that basically is where we are now. This is wrapped up with the new buildings, Bronzeville, et cetera. Gray, let's let Gray, if you have anything you want to begin to prepare the discussion for next week. I've sort of, well, that is what I'm trying to give you is the multi-causality in the head of Ferd Kramer and in the multiple participants involved. This is not a simple dual story of any 2 actors. Within individuals' heads and with these multiple organizations, lots of things are going on is my quick suggestion. And even though it's easier to try to explain things with 2. Gray, any comments on any of this?
In terms of thinking about things in multiple dimensions, I think I'm going to be talking about neighborhoods, and in particular, I spent a lot of time studying in Philadelphia, gay bathhouses. But I was thinking through this in terms of the course earlier before class and notes, based on what we talked about, the syllabus and the lectures and just general discussions afterwards. And I'm most familiar with bigger cities like New York and Philly and Chicago, LA, DC, San Francisco, where I spent a lot of time in those cities. But I think to your point that there's always different actors in those areas and there's no one answer for each city. So even just thinking about Philadelphia, as I was thinking through earlier today, what has led to the rise of the neighborhood and then the decline of the neighborhood in Philadelphia? We can see it through the lens of urban development and leadership. Like if we see things through urban renewal, which created a space for slums to be cleared for gay men to move in because they had single incomes and weren't getting married after World War II. And so they had this extra income, and so they buy cheap places and fix them up, and then you get these nice neighborhoods. Or we can see that through the lens of the marketplace, and then later scenes and like the bohemian kind of like artist, popular place to live, but also as it becomes a place to that people want to live, then young millennials start moving in, and it's not really the neighborhood anymore in terms of actually having LGBT folks living there. So that's just something that I want to kind of, I guess, tease y'all with before I go into a full lecture, thinking about, in particular, Philadelphia, but it's something that has changed in been similar in many cities, but not exactly the same in all cities, especially here in Chicago. And it has stayed kind of the same in other cities like San Francisco or even DC.
Okay, now that sounds great. I'm looking on my shelf for the book on Philadelphia for the Puerto Rican neighborhood. It's called Philadelphia Ghetto. Is that the title? It's an excellent monograph on the rise of, that is, the transformation from being a rundown, drug, crime defined neighborhood to one where the arts, parades, aesthetics, selling of artistic kinds of things have made it a tourist site. And now they now have buses with guys playing the guitar and singing songs as you get a tour of the neighborhood. Is that, you're not, doesn't ring any bells with you?
I haven't read the book, but I mean, I know that has definitely been the change in specifically Puerto Rican neighborhoods, especially in the north side, Fishtown area of Chicago, or sorry, of Philly, or certain areas that used to be near Temple, which used to be quote unquote very dangerous and shooting on campus, but now people are kind of gravitating towards taking tours of in certain ways that you just mentioned.
And the bigger theme which it illustrates connects with Forrest Stewart, in that they were explicitly using the arts, like the guitar in the bus tour, or the parades for tourists to come and see, or the restaurants, the certain kinds of bakeries, the decorating of the faces of the little kids to be in the parade and the like. That kind of thing is detailed very, very much as an economic, cultural, transformative set of policies that succeeded in making it a tourist destination, and not just tourists, but also visitors who enjoy it from other parts of Philadelphia in ways that were the opposite of the past, where people were afraid to go there because of the shootings and the gangs. So Forrest doesn't get to things like that at all, but the intermediary role of the symbolic, the social media, the using and the conveying of using these new computer tools to generate emotions instead of paying people off in ways that are now called corruption, although it's been done for centuries in much of the world, as a way of making the economic and political social mechanisms all together.
I guess that's
Okay.
the other. I guess I just do want to add one thing to your point then about having these intermediate social media apps and things like that come in. The decline of the neighborhood, as I'll point out, has been linked then also to social, like certain apps like Grindr and Tinder and things of the like, where as people move away from the bathhouses into using these apps, and people become more dispersed, you can see where people are, but you don't have to necessarily be in the neighborhood then to find other LGBT folk.
Yeah, no, that's a big theme, but let's let you talk about that next time. But that, I mean, you give, everyone's got a flavor of how these dramatically changed dynamics can work, even leading to the not only, well, one is to transform the Puerto Rican neighborhood into an attractive, desirable place to go. The neighborhood is now being described in this popular book as saying the neighborhood is now going to maybe not disappear totally, but it's going to get smaller. And as data showing that this is happening across the US, that the neighborhoods are getting smaller. At the same time that more people may be self-defined as gays than in the past. So how put those two together? And we'll learn next week, or next Wednesday. Okay, thank you, folks. Yeah, this is, or no, is today? Yeah, today's Monday. So we'll stand with office hours with people who would like.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Okay. Are you there, Andy?
Yeah, I'm here. My internet is a bit unreliable, so I can't turn my camera on.
Okay, very good. Well, you're a very nice gray A with a white letter in the middle. Anything else from Andy or Gray? That was good foreshadowing of what we're going to get. Yeah, the guy who did that book, whose name, as you see, I'm bad on many names, but he's become a leading author on urban cultural analysis, and he went to Yale, and then I think he's went to Princeton and Yale. Forgotten which one he's at now, but basically, with Jeff Alexander and others, he's aiming higher, and he's been co-editor of a number of handbooks of sociology and things like that. So it's good for you to learn a little bit about what